Hello, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Lagrange. I am a researcher at l'ESIA Observatoire de Paris in France. I'm mainly interested in high contrast imaging of distant exoplanets, and I am also working on radial velocity searches for exoplanets, either young planets or Earth-like planets. I am leading currently an ERC project dedicated to the discovery and the characterization of young exoplanets. So if you are interested, just send me an email. So today I'm going to talk about direct imaging of young planets. We will see why and how we do that. We'll talk about the results of the surveys of exoplanets. I will talk today only on the ground-based surveys and ground-based results in general. We'll talk about individual studies and on the coupling with other techniques. Then we'll speak about the future of direct imaging, still from the ground, and I'll give some takeaway messages. I will not talk too much about planet characterization because there are several talks about this subject already. So, you can go and listen to these talks. So, in the workshop, you're going to hear about a lot of techniques of exoplanet searches, transit technique, radial velocity, which have been together the techniques which have provided the largest number of exoplanets. Direct imaging has provided so far only a few numbers of exoplanets, but they are very interesting. And this is because direct imaging can give access to long period planets that indirect technique cannot give access to. So they are absolutely mandatory, this planet, in order to have a full view of the system architectures from a fraction of astronomical unit to several hundreds of astronomical units. They are obviously needed to get reliable numbers on the planet demographics. It is also a technique that is very well suited to learn about planet properties, effective temperature, gravity, metallicity, chemical composition of the atmosphere, a lot of information that we may discuss about. And it is also very, this type of planets are also very important because they give, they can be compared to the disk studies, so we can learn a lot about formation processes. Yet it's very difficult to make direct imaging of exoplanets. If you look at Jupiter around the sun or around a sun-like star, the contrast at 2 micron is about 10 to the minus 9. So it's very high. If you look at hot Jupiters, which are much hotter, the contrast is much better, but they are too close to the star to be resolved by classic to-date telescopes. Now we know that planets, when they are formed, form probably hot, and then they cool down as a function of age. And models predict that planets will be, Jupiter-like planets will be 1,000 times hotter at 10 million years compared to Jupiter today. So this is why young systems are much more favorable today for direct imaging. Direct imaging is based on 3 key steps. The first one from the ground is the use of adaptive optics to correct from the perturbation of the atmosphere and to retrieve a proper, clean point spread function. Then we have to add coronagraphs to block out the starlight, and then to use a post-processing technique to suppress the remaining speckle. And We'll talk about that during the rest of the talk, obviously. Adaptive optics first is really the first pillar of the technique. Adaptive optics is used to correct the incoming wavefronts on the telescope, which has been perturbed by the Earth's atmosphere. It goes on a deformable mirror that will control the wavefronts and give again a plane wavefront. And the three key elements are the wavefront sensor, which analyzes the perturbation of the atmosphere, the real-time computer, and the deformable mirror. The key parameter are the bandwidth of the system, the number of actuators that are used to correct from the perturbations, and the wavefront sensitivity. And the magic number for us is the Strehl, which measures the quality of the correction and how close you are to a perfect point spread function, instrumental point spread function. This is an illustration of the effect now of the adaptive optics. These are images that we took with a sphere on the VLT in H-band on a seeing of 0.8 arcsecond. And you see the seeing image of a star. When you put on the adaptive optic system sphere, the contrast that you recover a PSF, which is much cleaner, and the contrast at 0.5 arcsecond is about 10 to the minus 3, which is already a considerable gain in terms of contrast. Then if you add a coronagraph, you gain another factor of 10, which is not enough to detect planets. But if you thanks to the data processing, you will get the final contrast of about 10 to the minus 6, 7, which is what you need to make the first images of exoplanets. The separation range where the contrast is approved, which is the correction region, is at H-band is about 800 milliarcseconds. It depends, of course, on the quality of the correction, the wavelengths, and the diameter of the telescope. Post-processing is a very important step, as we have seen, to reach the contrast that we need. And there are now several ways to correct the halo, the remaining speckle in the halo that are really the ones that prevent you from detecting the planets. In the old ages, we used to use reference star differential imaging. We observed the stars that were taken, observed more or less at the same, within the same condition as the scientific star of interest. And we use these reference stars to build a model of the PSF. And we subtracted this model to the star of interest. And this star has been used since many years, and this model, sorry, and it has been used now again, coupling with if you take a lot of a library of reference stars. So far, the main techniques that have been used to remove the speckles, instrumental speckles, are angular differential imaging and spectral differential imaging that uses that allow to differentiate the astrophysical signal from instrumental speckles. Angular differential imaging, in this technique, the field of view is rotating and the pupil is kept fixed so that you can add up the instrumental speckle and subtract them, build the PSF and subtract them to the images of interest. Yet this requires to get a large field of view, a large enough field of view rotation, especially when you want to look at look very close to the stars. So it leads to significant timing constraints and a limited sky coverage, because for some stars you cannot have typical values of like 30 degrees of field of view rotation. And it leads to a significant self-subtraction of the astrophysical signal when you're close to the star. So this is a major inconvenience. Another way to proceed is to use use another diversity, which is use spectral differential imaging. And in that case, you use the fact that the instrumental speckles are chromatic, so they will move depending on the wavelengths as a function of the wavelengths away from the star. And you can play on that effect to remove these speckles. Again, you have some self-subtraction close to the star. So it's not ideal. Preferential star differential imaging is better in this way. Continuing on data processing, several ways to subtract the speckle have been proposed. The one that is mostly used so far is to estimate the PSF by some ways and to subtract it to the data. There are also ways that are being considered now since a few years, which are statistical approaches where you don't try to build a model PSF. You just act on the statistic of, for instance, small patches, and you play on that. You analyze these statistics to remove the speckle. And also, since a few years, there are also deep learning approaches that are being tried and used. But so far, for at least for the surveys that I will talk about, the subtraction decomposition methods, TLOCI, CLIP, or PCA have been used. A little bit of history about the generation of adaptive optic systems. So the first adaptive optic system was installed on the ESO 3.6 telescope in the 90s, and it gave a contrast of a few 10 to the minus 3 at 0.5 arc second. And you have an example of the system, the brown dwarf JQ loop here, obtained with Adonis on the 3.6 telescope. It is barely distinguishable from the speckles. Then this is the same image with the NACO instrument that was installed on the VLT, the first adaptive optic system on the VLT. And you see here the planet, the companion, which is much more visible. Of course, the number of actuators was bigger on NACO, and the correction was made much faster than with Adonis. And then there is the third generation of adaptive optic systems on at ESO. On the VLT, you have the SPHERE extreme adaptive optic system with 1600 actuators and bandpass of more than 1 kilohertz. And then you get, of course, a much improved contrast, and this is the JQ loop B that you see here compared to the one that we had more than 20 years ago. And now, of course, all systems that, especially that want to do direct imaging of planets, are equipped with an adaptive optic system. The first planetary mass bodies that were detected were done with the NACO telescope, with the NACO instruments on the VLT. It's the ABPIC-B that you see here at more than 250 astronomical units from the star. Its mass is at the border of the brown dwarf regime, and this is to mass 1207 B, which is orbiting a brown dwarf. So it's a couple of light objects, 25 Jupiter masses and about 5 Jupiter masses. This was back in the early 2000. Then the first detection of what we can call exoplanets or exoplanets was done with Gemini Niki. And you see here the famous system of a 3-planet BCD around HR 8799. And on the right-hand side, the image of Beta Pictoris B, which is here at 2 epochs observed with NACO. Here, the closest planet is about 20 astronomical units, and here it is less than 10 astronomical units. Now I'm going to talk about the surveys, and with this generation of instruments, there has been the second generation of adaptive optic instruments. There's been a lot of surveys that have been made. They all focused on the near-infrared or L and M wavelengths, because it is it is where the adaptive optics works the best. It's the best compromised. Also compared to spatial resolution, and the planet are the hot planets that we are looking at for are hot and are bright at these wavelengths. All these surveys have focused on a young star, a planet in young and close by associations that I have listed a few of them on the right hand side, and they are focused on either early type stars or solar type star, or even late type stars. And you see that mainly all the target stars are closer than 100 parsecs. This is the gallery of the planet or brown dwarf that have been detected with this first generation of surveys. And I have in contour here, you have the indication on the color of the parent star, AF in blue, KM in red, and brown dwarf in maroon. And you see that in brown, a lot of brown dwarf, and very few planets detected around K and M and G star, and most of the planets were detected around A-type stars. Now the telescope, the 10-meter class telescopes are equipped with what we call extreme adaptive optics system, which have like sphere a lot of actuators to correct for the incoming wavefront perturbation, and they are optimized to have the least, the best, to control as much as possible the optical path, so and to control for the non-common path aberration. I will talk mainly on GPI and sphere, and talk about the spheres that have been the surveys, the biggest surveys, which have been done, in fact, by these two instruments, Gemini and at Gemini and at VLT. So the GPI instrument, the survey was about 900 hours over 3 years. It looked at about 600 stars, young stars, in the associations that I talked about earlier, plus in the SCOSEN association. I will come back on that. They focused on A to M or K stars. And the first 300 stars have been analyzed and published in a paper by Erik Nielsen et al. In 2019. The typical exposure time on the star was about 38 minutes. And the sphere and the observations were done with the IFS mode in Y2K band. The field of view of the GPI is shown here in green, so it is a small field of view, 2.7 by 2.7 arc seconds. Concerning sphere, we observed both simultaneously with IRDIS, which is an infrared camera with a wide field of view, 11 by 12. And simultaneously with an IFS in a YJ band and on a very small field of view that you have here, 1.7 by 1.7. And most of the observations were with IRDIS were done in H2, H3. We had 200 nights over 5 years. We had a list of about 800 stars, basically the same one, the same list as the GPI list, all the same type of stars. The first 150 stars have been analyzed and published in a series of papers by Maud Langlois, Silvano Desidera, and Arthur Vigan. And contrarily, our exposure times were longer than the typical GPI ones, between 60 and 90 minutes, so as to get a variation of a parallactic angle of 30 degrees for all our stars. I said that finally the targets of the survey were the same as the first generation, but we had in addition the SCOSEN association, which is further away, more than 100 parsec, but it has been recognized as a very important association. It's the closest association for a star-forming region. And several brown dwarf and planets had been detected quite early in 2014, 15, and so on. And a lot of disks were observed in that region, showing that it was probably the region where you had to look for forming planets. So the results now of the SPHERE and GPI surveys, both surveys show an improved sensitivity with respect to previous generation of surveys. You see here, for instance, the comparison of the NACO surveys of the capability of detection in a percentage that we had with the NACO survey in red, and you can compare also with the NACO, the SPHERE capabilities now. So you see that we have moved our detection capabilities closer to the star, and we have moved to lighter planets as well. And this is based on an analysis of 150 stars. These are the results in terms of number of stars that were able to detect a given mass and at a planet at a given semi-major axis based on 300 stars. And in both cases, you see that the sweet spots of these instruments are about 20 astronomical units. So this is where you have you will most probably find planets if they are there, massive planets. You see also that the planets that we are sensitive to are mostly more massive than 3 to 5 Jupiter masses. Of course, it depends on the separation to the star. And we see also that the semi-major axis, the planet with a semi-major axis smaller than 10 AU are only marginally detectable with these systems. The planet identification strategy with SPHERE and GPI was a bit different. With GPI, it was based on the spectrum, and the idea was to search for methane absorption in the spectrum of the planets. For SPHERE, the planet identification was done using 2 epochs and looking for common motion, proper motion between the star and the candidate companion. In the case of IRDIS, as we had a very big field of view, we had sometimes a lot of candidates in the field of view, which were, of course, most of the time background stars, and we had to rely on color magnitude diagram criteria in order to choose which system we wanted to reobserve and check for the common proper motion. Now I move to the detections. Planets were soon detected by an exoplanet was soon detected by GPI around 51 Eri. It is a light planet, about 5 Jupiter masses, about 6 to 700 K, and it is at a projected separation of about 13 astronomical units. And the planet was detected with the sphere at about 92 astronomical units from EIP 65426, and it is somewhat hotter at 13 K. And the mass is between 6 and 12 Jupiter masses. And again, this was in SCOSEN. And you see here the common proper motion criterion and the absorption of the methane here and here. And other planets were detected by a sphere. One which has become very famous is PDS 70b that you see here. It is a very young planet, a few million years, and it is located in the gap inside the protoplanetary disk that you see here with the sphere, and you see here with ALMA at about the same spatial resolution. And what is interesting is also that this planet has been detected in imaging with NEWS in H-alpha imaging, which shows that the planet is still accreting. And in the NEWS data, Affert et al. Also saw another detection that corresponds to planet C around the PDS, so PDS 70C, with an estimated projected separation of about 30 astronomical units and a mass of about 3 to 5 Jupiter masses. Last, a few other planets were detected, not in the course of the GTO survey of sphere, but in the course of another survey, which was dedicated to solar type stars in SCOSEN, a sample of 70 solar type stars. And the detection have been published recently. A very nice system, two planet system around a K-type star around this star, and it is a system of planets. This one is at 160 AU. This one 320 AU. Again, of course, in SCOSEN. And it is the first planetary system around data image around a solar type star. This was published by Bone et al. In 2 papers, and Alexander Bone also detected a planet around another K-type star in the same survey. Of course, not only Sphere and JPI are not alone. SKEXAO has also observed search for planets around and made survey around accelerating stars, and this is a very probable new planet resembling the planets around HR 8799. The proper motion has been confirmed. The dynamical mass is constrained, and this is a paper result that will be published shortly by Curry et al. Okay, if we look now at the planets that have been imaged with masses less than 20 Jupiter masses here, this is the gallery, but it goes to more massive planets, and here you have the gallery of the detection. You see that some detection go very far. What is maybe more interesting is if you order the planet, you plot the mass ratio of the planet compared to the star as a function of the star mass. You see here that for light planets, you have here a very large mass ratio. It corresponds probably to planetary mass binary brown dwarf. And this probably corresponds to another or others way of formation of the planets. Okay, now I move to statistical results. The results that have been the survey that have been done show already that massive planets beyond the 10 astronomical units are rare. It's not completely a surprise. When Sphere and JPI, I guess, were built, we were not expecting to find thousands or even hundreds or even dozens of planets. This is actually what happens. The frequency of planets between 5 and 13 Jupiter masses beyond the 10 AU is estimated to be at about a few percent, 3.5% by Nielsen et al. Brown dwarf in this type of region are also rare. One result that seems to be solid enough is that the planet occurrence rate is higher for massive stars, more than 1.5 solar mass stars, than for solar type stars. So this seems to be a solid result, and the sphere results agree with are in agreement with these conclusions. Now, concerning the implication of formation process, probably the occurrence rate observed suggests that massive giant planets and brown dwarfs do not form in the same way. Vigan et al. Have tried to compare with the planet observed with the prediction of a core accretion scenario for giant planet or gravitational instability within disk. What we see here is the prediction of such models in yellow to red of a core accretion scenario, and blue here the planets formed by gravitational instabilities within this. And you see that we are more sensitive to planets formed under gravitational instability than by core accretion. We really need to go closer to the star to be very sensitive to core accretion. And so there is no consensus yet on whether core accretion or gravitational instability is favored. And also we can also say that the models maybe still are incomplete, in particular gravitational instability. It's very difficult to know how down to which masses we can go by this model. Now, a few words about the comparison to radial velocity searches. Radial velocity searches have been started a few decades ago, about 3 decades ago. So now they are in principle sensitive to planets with a semi-major axis larger than 10 AU. In fact, Fulton et al. Have published recently the statistical results on the number of planets, the rate of planets that have been observed since 28 years. And they have detected planets up to 25 or so astronomical units. And they have compared the number of planets, the rate of planets with masses between 5 and 13 Jupiter masses, and ranging between 10 and 100 AU. And they show that the rate of planets seem to be very close to each other. The rate of radial velocity planet and the rate of imaged giant planets. Yet I would like to caution about these results on this interpretation, because the rates derived from radial velocity techniques beyond 20 AU are very uncertain. And also the planet ranges, ages are really different. If you look here, if you could divide the separation between 1 and 5 AU, 5 to 10 AU, and more than 10 AU, you see that radial velocity are very sensitive to all planets closer than 5 AU. They are very sensitive to massive planets between 5 and 10 AU, but they are not sensitive to light planets between 5 and 10 AU. And in this region, high contrast imaging is really very poorly sensitive. And direct imaging is becoming sensitive here for massive giant planets further than 10 AU, where radial velocity are not very sensitive. And again, the ages of the planets are not the same. So we have to be cautious about this interpretation. One aspect is, as I said, that the Fulton and almost all the radial velocity surveys have focused on giant planet around solar type star on the main sequence, while we are looking at young stars. And there have been very few radial velocity survey to search for young planets around young stars, because it's really difficult, as we will see, and the rates then are very poorly constrained. To my knowledge, the biggest survey was done, the one we did with Antoine Grandchamp on more than 100 stars. And we show that the frequency of a giant planet with period less than 1,000 days is about 1%, but we have still a small number of data. We confirm that the rate of brown dwarf is small, and that there is a trend for higher occurrence rate around for planets around AF type stars and for solar type stars. More data are needed in order to complement the data that we have in high contrast imaging. And there is a talk from Arpita Roy on this subject. Okay, now I'm going to talk about peculiar planets that have been detected, and we'll try to show you how the coupling with other technique is really fantastic to get more information on the orbit of the planet, on its mass, on the presence of additional planets, and on the characterization of the atmosphere. So I will go very fast on these parts. Showing, of course, that orbital parameter is one key information that we want to get on these planets. And here I have plotted a few examples of orbital characterization of directly imaged planets. And what you see is that in most cases, the coverage of the orbit is very small compared to the observation of the orbit. And in the case of course, the closest the planet are to the star, the best the orbital plane, the orbit is covered. But in many cases, in the coverage is very limited, which gives large uncertainties in the determination of the orbits with MCMC, for instance. Now, for a few of these planets, have been observed with long baseline interferometry with gravity on the VLTI, and the precision of gravity is very high. You see here, for instance, on PDS 70b, these are the observations that were done in the high contrast imaging, and the scale here is 400 milliarc seconds. And you see here the observations with the gravity, and you see the image here has been zoomed by a factor of more than 100. And you see, of course, gravity will give you a very much more precise astrometry of the planets. And observations have been done on HR 8799E with the gravity, showing that planet E is probably not strictly coplanar with the other planets. For PDS 70b, measuring the planet eccentricity with a very interesting precision, and concluding to nearly circular orbit for PDS-C, and giving information on the configuration of the system. So, and Matthias Novak, there is a talk by Matthias Novak on this subject. Now, I move to the mass determination of the planet. As you know, the planets that we detect in direct imaging, we do not have access to their mass. We have to rely on evolution models, and evolution models are different depending on the assumptions that you do on this model. So you go from a cold start or a hot start, or in between. In a hot start, all the energy of the accretion is kept to heat the planet, while in the cold start, the energy, most of the energy is radiated away. So the history, the thermal history of the planet is very different depending on the way the planet formed. Of course, we don't know how the planet formed. So there is a lot of degeneracies in the mass determination, depending on the models and depending on the age of the system, of the system. So this is why it's so important also to look at associations of known ages. So if you want to get a mass determination of your planets, you have to couple with something else. And of course, Gaia and absolute astrometry, sorry, is certainly a very interesting approach. And this early on, a few years ago, Snellen et al. Have used Gaia and Hipparcos astrometry to constrain the mass of beta peak B, and it was concluded that the mass was about 11 Jupiter masses, but the analysis was quite simple and did not include the fact that there is actually another planet around beta peak B. Another very recent example is the determination of the probable mass of HR 8799E by Brandt et al. And using the Gaia early DR3 and on the Hipparcos Gaia catalog of acceleration. And they conclude that definitely the dynamical mass of HR 8799E is smaller than, is lower than 13 Jupiter masses and is about 10 plus or minus 2 Jupiter masses. And of course, with Gaia DR3 and DR4, we will get much more precision on this determination, but we need to have planets that are close enough, of course, to the stars. Mass determination can also, of course, be done by the coupling with radial velocity, but you need, again, to look at planets that are very close to the stars so that the monitoring is not too long. This is not easy to do because the young stars are often very active and some are pulsating. This is, for instance, the case of HR 8799, which happens to be a Gamma Dor star pulsating with a terrible period of about 0.5 day. And with an amplitude of about 2 kilometers per second, so very, very difficult to get information on from radial velocity planets because of this pulsation. Beta Pictoris is also pulsating, is also an early type star, so pulsating with an amplitude more than 1.5 kilometers per second, but the period is much, the periods of the pulsations are much smaller, so it's more convenient to remove or at least to correct for the pulsation. And using hard data, we could give early constraints on the mass of beta peak B, to be less than 15 Jupiter masses, assuming an eccentric circular orbit, sorry. And we have then done long-term monitoring and very deep monitoring of beta peak with ARPS from 2003. And this monitoring has allowed us to find another planet in the beta peak system at about 2.5 astronomical unit, about 9 Jupiter masses. What is interesting is that you can now use whatever you have, radial velocity, high contrast imaging, long baseline interferometry, absolute astrometry, to constrain at the same time the orbits and the mass of the two planets. And this is something, of course, that we can do only because we can try to do only because we have a lot of observations on beta peak B that I'm showing here with NACO and SPHERE. We have also data from gravity, and we have more than 7,000 data on in radial velocity. And in doing so, we were able to constrain very well the orbit of beta peak B and C, and improving, thanks to gravity, some parameters by a factor more than 10, between 10 and 100, depending on the orbital parameters you are talking about. We have been able to constrain the inclination of beta peak C, and to estimate the mass of beta peak C at 8.2 plus or minus 0.8 Jupiter masses. Beta peak B mass is still quite poorly constrained because we do not have a sufficient coverage of the radial velocity data. Coupling high contrast imaging with radial velocity is also very interesting if you want to see in the system if you have additional planets. And you do that coupling again this high contrast imaging data, the contrast maps that you can derive, and the radial velocity data that you have. And when you do so for beta peak, and you remove the signal of beta peak B and C, with a Monte Carlo approach, you can exclude for beta peak B any planet with mass more massive than about 2.5 Jupiter masses throughout the disk, between a fraction here 10 to the minus 1 to 100 astronomical unit. You can exclude all planets more massive than 2.5 Jupiter masses. Now you can also couple high contrast imaging with absolute astrometry and looking for additional planets. And this is Booth et al. Have detected a disk within around HR 8799 that you see here with ALMA. Using only high contrast imaging, you get information on the possibility of additional planet down to 10 astronomical units, but we are in the regime of quite massive planets. The idea is to search for additional planets that could explain the gap here, the inner gap in the disk observed with ALMA. And Timothy Brandt, sorry for the bad reference, Timothy Brandt has used the Gaia data to remove, to get upper limits on the planets that can be present around HR 8799 between a few astronomical units and 15 astronomical units. And you see that the limit here in that range are particularly good, more than 5, about 5 Jupiter masses. So it complements very well the result that we have using only high contrast imaging. Now, the last coupling I wanted to mention is the coupling with spectroscopy. Coupling with spectroscopy will, of course, give information on the planet, on the atmosphere of the planet. As I said, we will provide information on the effective temperature, the cloud coverage, the gravity. If you have good enough resolution, you can resolve the CO molecular absorption that you have here. This is the case for beta pictoris observed here with GPI at 5 at a resolution of 50. Here the same resolution at K-band with gravity 500 spectral resolution, and here to higher spectral resolution with a symphony in blue here with 1.5 hour of observation, and here in red with gravity with the 4 telescopes 2.2 hours and the 4 UTs at about 4,000 astronomical units. And then you can start to have information on not only the effective temperature, gravity, but also on the carbon to oxygen ratio, which is an important information for concerning the formation process of the planets. Coupling with spectroscopy also can give information on the planet of the period of the rotation period of the planet itself and on its radial velocity. And Jane Birkby will talk about that in a talk, as I mentioned before. And it can also boost using correlation between the spectra, the observed spectra and template spectra. It can also boost the detection of the planet. So it is depending on what you are doing, you will boost the detection capability. You will get physical and atmospheric characterization of your planets. So the coupling between high contrast imaging and spectroscopy, and especially high resolution spectroscopy, is really a powerful tool, and it's going, I think, to increase its use will increase in the next years. Another example on HIP 65426b and on HR 8799 BCDE that have been recently observed with this technique, correlation technique, with K-peak on the Keck adaptive optic system by Wang et al. The resolution here, spectral resolution, is 35,000. And Jane will talk about that. Now I will talk a little bit about the future. First, the current limitation. As you have seen, we are still limited in terms of separation to the star, so semi-major axis, and the mass of the planets, and we are still sensitive to young planets only. So we have to use radial velocity for short separation, no doubt about that. Use Gaia whenever possible. And we have also to go deeper and fainter in high contrast imaging and improve the data processing. As I mentioned, the aim is to be able to explore the stars throughout the disk without gaps. So far, the gaps between high contrast imaging and indirect method is not yet filled. It is filled in only very few exceptions, and we have to fill it. It's still to be done. Now also the parent star magnitude are still bright. So it means that it's difficult to observe stars fainter than, depending on the instrument. With JIPA, it was about 9 or 10. With the sphere, it's about 13. And you need to observe fainter star if you want to look at a more distant formation region, for instance. So you have to improve your wavefront sensor capabilities. And if you want to characterize your planets, so far the characterization is done at about a resolution of 50 with classical IFS. You have to couple with higher spectral resolution. So this leads to the forthcoming ground-based high contrast imager on 10-meter class telescopes. At ESO, we will have ERIS in 2022 with the Spitfire, which was before mounted on a Symphony, which will provide a resolution of 400 to 800,000. We hope we will have a mask. For the moment, it's not scheduled. And we will have also NICS, which will provide coronagraphy at L and M bands. And ERIS is going to provide a very good Streul ratio at these wavelengths. There is the SPHERE Plus project led by Anthony Bocaletti. The idea is to improve the adaptive optics with the second stage of correction, faster correction, and also having an infrared wavefront sensor, and to correct better from common path aberration. It will be a precursor for the ELT PCS. There is also a project under development, IRISE, to couple Cryo-ERIS Plus with the SPHERE. This is led by Arthur Vigan, and get spectra of known exoplanets, but they at 100,000 spectral resolution, so it has to be very bright planets. And it will be a follow-up, not a detection instrument. And GPI is also, there is the GPI 2.0 version that is currently under development with a pyramid wavefront sensor, so improved wavefront sensor, narrowband low resolution prism, new coronagraph, and GPI 2.0 should be ready soon, as I understand from the literature. Now I move to the ELTs with the ISO ELTs, the TMT and the GMT. The idea is to go again in terms of direct imaging, closer and fainter, and to characterize the planets. So there is a lot of science to be done, of course, detecting planets, studies the planet populations, studies the system architecture, and a lot of, and look for extreme planets, look for disks as well, and see the link with the planets, the characterization of the planet. A lot of things will be done with the ELT. And in particular, we hope to be able to detect biomarkers on a very low mass planets, Earth-mass planet, if possible, with some generation of instruments. So a few examples of what is going to be done on the ELT at ISO instrument with the first light instrument Mikado. Mikado will provide is an imager which will provide good contrast of about 10 to the -5 at 100 milliarc from the star, and so you see the gain between compared to SPHERE that you have here. An increase, you will get much closer to the star, down to about 30 or 50 milliarc. And with this instrument, it will be possible, for instance, to detect beta peak C. You have here the SPHERE data, NACO data on beta peak B. You have here the simulated Mikado images of beta peak B, but also beta peak C at H and K. It will be also possible to detect if there is any fainter planets, lighter planets around HR 8799. You see here a fake planet at 7K, and a fake planet, it's just here, and a fake 30-100K planet around the system, and you have here E and D. So possibilities to get much closer to the star and detect giant planets. With the ISO Harmony, is a high contrast instrument at near infrared as well. It has it will be equipped with an IFS with a resolution up to 800,000. And it will have focal mask and includes so a high contrast module. And you have here a simulation of the capabilities of contrast that we will have with Harmony at about 100 milliarc with a delta H of about 16 magnitude, and assuming a gain of 2.5 magnitude with molecule mapping by cross correlation. So you see again a very good capabilities down to about 50 milliarc seconds. So with Harmony, simulation made by Houlet et al. Show that it will be possible to detect down to 3 Jupiter masses or 2 Jupiter masses planet down to 1 astronomical unit from the star. So here, now the overlap with the radial velocity technique will be quite excellent. I will finish with METIS, but very fast to show that METIS will give an order of magnitude better sensitivity in terms of planet detection. It will work in the thermal infrared. And in particular, these are simulation of of Earth-like planets at respectively 0.55 and 1 astronomical unit. And around alpha Centauri A, you see that the planets should be detected according to current simulation in direct imaging. So this is again a very important step that will be reached by the ELT. And finally, as I mentioned, I talked about Harmony. It will be an interesting benchmark for the ELT PCS, which aim is to image and characterize nearby exo-Earths. And according to current simulation, a number of exo-Earths could be detected, will be detected and characterized with PCS. PCS is not a first light instrument, so it will be ready in a few years. It will require extreme adaptive optics, a lot of development, of course, two-stage adaptive optics. It will be quite a complex instrument, but the objectives are very exciting as well. Okay, I will move the space and move to takeaway messages. For the moment, image giant planet demographics. We are still sensitive now to planets beyond 10 astronomical units mainly, and planet masses of about 5 Jupiter mass at 10 AU, and less, of course, at tens of AU, about 1 Jupiter mass. We know that the massive giant planets are more numerous around massive stars than around low mass stars, which was predicted. The overlap with radial velocity is still limited, and so we need to improve the direct imaging capabilities to test, in particular, the formation processes of the planets. Individual image planets are fantastic, really fantastic laboratories for further studies. And we see that when we look at the huge number of papers that have been published on Betapeak, on HR 8799, it's really impressive. You can really do a lot of science with them. You can, of course, constrain the orbital and physical property, constrain the atmosphere, and the coupling with long baseline interferometry, radial velocity, absolute astrometry has already helped to constrain these planets, and it is just a beginning. It is there is no question about the fact that it will become regular practice to look at to complement this high contrast imaging with these indirect techniques. For the future, we will look for lighter, closer planets, older planets, and characterize their atmosphere we hope that the ELT will make direct imaging of a light giant planet for sure, but also super Earth. Again, the detection, my main take-home message is that the detection and characterization will be more and more interlaced in the future. There is a lot of room of improvement now on the 10-meter telescope, and JPI 2.0 will soon show it, and we hope Sphere Plus will also show that. And we have to always remember that these instruments on a 10-meter class telescope are excellent benchmarks for the ELT. And I will stop with with my talk, and I will give a small review next week. Goodbye.